Hello, hello, friends, and welcome to our webinar, our IHSSA webinar. I see we have 40 friends that are currently logging on. That's wonderful. So glad that you are able to join us on this gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous day. At least it is here in West Des Moines, Iowa, 5000 Westtown Parkway. Sweet. Sweet, sweet, sweet 150. It's always a gorgeous day here at the IHSSA. And more friends are logging on. Welcome, 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 welcome. It is still summer, everybody. I just want to reinforce that. And you still have time to get to the Iowa State Fair if you have not already done so. And yes, keep them coming. We have more friends logging on. We will begin here in just a minute. And thank you. Thank you so much for joining our IHSSA Judge and Coaches webinar on this gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous Saturday, August 17th. So fun to have us all connected here. Wonderful. And some more friends are joining us. Welcome. Good to see you all. A reminder, this is a webinar. So if you are like, I can't see myself, or where am I? This feels different than per se a meeting. You're okay. So don't panic. Don't panic, anybody. If you're logging on and you're thinking, where am I? I can't see myself and I can't hear myself because it's a webinar. You are not seeing yourself and you cannot hear yourself. So I see, yes, it is 10 o'clock. Let's go ahead. Let's get started. Hello, hello, friends. My name is Stacy Hansen, and I am the Iowa High School Speech Association, the executive director, and welcome to our Judges Coaches webinar. We have a panel of 3 outstanding experts in their fields, and we are so gracious to them for offering their expertise, and we will be giving each of them a lovely introduction. Thank you so much, Nicole and Adam and Dr. Ferial, for being here. And again, I'll give more insight on them as they come up. We also are very much in gratitude to our judge certification team that is here representing all parts of the state. So Dirk Waller, Southwest, Council Bluffs, Abraham Lincoln. There is Dirk. And Lisa Fife is here. I know she is here.
I am here.
Yes, there she is. From Northeast Waverly, Shell Rock. We also have Vince Haratsky from the Southeast and Tri-County. Thank you so much, Vince. And of course, Sean Starr, Northwest Woodbury Central. Thank you, Sean. So glad that you are here. And of course, we have our coach at large, Carrie Tinkham from Cedar Rapids, Washington, who is also doing a wonderful job of selling her wonderful flowers this morning. Wow, that's incredible. Nice hat, Carrie. Nice, nice, nice hat. So if you are friends, if you are doing this for judge recertification, I will be giving you the specifics of all of that at the end of this. And you will be asked a question at the very end of the webinar to verify your attendance. So judge certification friends, make sure you are staying on for the whole time. A reminder, this is a webinar, so no panic. If you can't see yourself, normal in a webinar, you don't see yourself and you don't hear yourself. However, you do have that little Q&A button when you have a question. That's where you will put in your response, is that Q&A button, and that's downstage center on your screen to access that. Finally, I remind you, this is from the perspective of judging. So for our coaches out there, you're going to be, the lens is through that of a judge versus a coach, but we always become better coaches when we're seeing what does a judge see and how do they view that? All right, and now it is my very, very dear pleasure to introduce to you from UNI, Nicole Harkin. Dr. Nicole Harkin is an assistant professor of instruction in communication and media at UNI. She credits her entire career to her IHSSA experience under the coaching of Marilyn Aiden at North Lynn High School. It was her involvement with individual and large group speech that sparked her love for all things communication. She remembers lying in bed in the summer of 1993 and realizing that UNI had an actual degree where you could teach speech and theater. It was an awakening for sure. That degree led to another as she pursued teaching in higher education. She constantly touts the value of being involved in speech as building a lifelong skill that will always come in handy. Welcome, Dr. Harkin. We are so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Stacy. What a great introduction. I am so glad to be here and so honored to be asked to share my thoughts and my ideas in something that has been so important in my life. I was telling this group earlier from meeting and having great friends in high school to having this now thing as a career, and I help every year with IHSSA Allstate when you all come to our beautiful campus. And that's always such a great moment for me. I sort of relish in walking around campus and seeing all of these young people and always think about my own adventures coming to Allstate. Our speech coach always had the entire team got to go to Allstate. And there were several of us that chose UNI because it was our first introduction. Most of us were farm kids in East Central Iowa. If you don't know where North Lynn is, it's just north of Cedar Rapids, just south of Manchester. For many of us, it was our first foray into higher education. And so I'm so thankful to IHSSA and to the leadership and to my own experiences for that reason. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I have been asked today to, in fact, chat about, let's see, we got the screen share. All right, I think we're good. Yes, Stacy, can you give me a thumbs up that we're good? You can see screen and all is well.
Yes, you
Okay,
are good. You are good.
perfect. Thank you. So I was really excited just to let you know I broke some copyright laws. I go ahead and took a little screenshot of your IHSSA webpage to throw that up here. So I'm being fully transparent about my legal activities this week and preparing this for you. So again, today I am really honored to talk about two different categories and then talk just a little bit about feedback. I always think from a judging perspective and a coaching perspective and a teaching perspective. I always think that when I come at speech, I come at it at so many different angles. I was a participant, so I know how it feels to sit in that chair. I've been a judge, right? And so you're trying to help this student get better, but also you want to recognize that this thing that they're doing when they're 15 years old, y'all, 15, it's terrifying to so many of them. And then also I served as a coach actually when I was in college too. So, coming from this from all perspectives, but we are going to chat today about spontaneous speaking, improv acting, and then just a little bit about feedback. But first, I want to talk a little bit about my own IHSSA experience and how I ended up here. Hey y'all, there's me. Right? Look at the nice gap, right, between my teeth. Yeah, this is circa probably
And
1992.
Nicole,
Yes.
you might need to advance your slide as you're talking. Heads up.
Oh, I did that. Okay. You know what I'm going to do is I am going to, can you see it
Yes,
now?
there. Yes, we
Okay,
see you.
we might have to use it in this way. I'm not sure why. it wouldn't advance on the slideshow, but we're just going to do it this way. Is that
You
okay?
got it. You got
Okay,
it. And what a great photo. I love that. Oh my goodness.
let's go. It's so great, right? So yes, this is me circa about, I think 1992, 1993 there on the left. This was my all-state photo for expository address. I did a fun little expos about doodling and what your doodling says about you. And then on this right side here, you will see us choral reading, circa 1994. I think I could tell by my hair, like it's kind of tamed a little bit. I went from big bangs early 90s to it's kind of tamed. So I think we're about 1994 in that right picture. So in that picture, the thing that's really special to me about that is there are 5 of us in that picture who were all in the same class, and we called ourselves the Speech Buddies, and went all on to have really great careers and stay in touch and do some pretty fantastic things. So if you, for instance, run across, if you were ever at UNI and you run across someone, her name is Kristen Woods. She is a VP. I'm not sure exactly what her title is, but she does a lot with student retention and programs. This is her right there. So she no longer looks like that also. She has much tamer hair, like all of us did who lived through the 90s. So again, this is sort of my foray at Northland School District. So today, when we talking about spontaneous speaking and improv, one of the things I really want to touch on just real quick is like, why is this an important category for students? Okay, first of all, so my daughter was in also in speech under the great Lisa Fife, who is here today, and she chose spontaneous speaking. And let me tell you, I was a nervous wreck. I would have never had the courage to do such a thing ever. Right? I did poetry, I did original oratory, I did expose, I did lit review. Spontaneous speaking, no way. No way. So I just think that the level of confidence and maybe insanity a little bit that our students have when they choose these categories is phenomenal, but also how incredibly valuable these categories are to them down the road. So things like job interviews. Talk about having to improv and spontaneously speak as someone asks you something in a very important situation in which you have no idea what they may ask. Sure, we all have the whole like these are the 10 most common interview questions, right? But we don't know necessarily what they're going to ask. This is such an important skill, even just for conversations with people we know, but even more so for people we don't know. How do we have conversations with people in stores? How do we have conversations, with a new work colleague? This is rooted in spontaneous speaking. How do I improvise this thing that I know nothing about in order to connect with an audience or connect with a person? But also, I would root this in being so important in any unscripted part of life, which is kind of all of life, right? And so this skill is so important. And I think sometimes students do shy away from these categories, much like I did, because it's really scary. And so what I'm going to do today, I decided, is really talk through the judge's ballot and how we can think about these things and what they actually mean, at least from a judge's perspective. So if you look at, for instance, in spontaneous speaking, we have organization, right? So systematic development, use of transitions, effective use of introduction and conclusion. So I want to talk just a little bit about first, what does the systematic development mean? So at UNI, we have a couple of courses, of course, that we teach that are basic level comm courses. We teach one called Cornerstone, which is an integrated writing and speaking course. We have another called Oral Comm, which is a basic sort of a speech comm course. And we also teach public speaking and a variety of other things. And one of the things that I always tell my freshmen, that if you learn nothing else from my class, nothing else at all, to be successful when giving a presentation like this, right? This is not necessarily acting, right? This is about information dissemination. You have to do 3 things. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. That's it. I always tell them, just remember those 3 things. Tell them what you're going to tell them, right? Set it up, right? Tell them, take them along that path, right? Tell them the things that you were going to tell them, but give them also an ending to remind them of where they have been. So those as being a systematic development of the three things. So how do we do this? So much of this is rooted in transitions. And you'll see my friend here, Vanna White, right, on the screen here. And one of the things that I love when we talk about transitions, and we have to do something a little different because I thought we'd be able to do an activity, but not realizing that I wasn't going to see everybody on the screen. We might try to do it through Q&A. But when we think about transitions, they are the things that are the guideposts, right? They are the things that let us know that you are changing a topic, that you are changing your thought process, that you are heading in a new direction. Think of it like a car blinker, right? That's how we know that someone is changing their path. And transitions are so important because, and this is one of the things I love telling students, by the time you give a speech, even if it's spontaneous, you have practiced this skill. And especially like an oratory, you have practiced this thing so many times. But always remember, it's the audience's first time hearing it. And when you think about it being the first time that an audience member has heard this thing, slowing down, thinking about transitions, helping people get from one place to another. So, for instance, if we have in spontaneous speaking, if we have this example gives three main points, right? Which is kind of a standard 2 to 3 main points. So we want to transition in, right, to that body. And then we want to transition from point A to point B, and from point B to point C, and point C to the conclusion. Now, there are a few ways we can do this. Obviously, we can use lots of words, right? There are lots of transition words, right? That you can go, um, also, consequently, in addition to, right? So teaching students and recognizing those words, in from a judge's point of view, when we think about how do we know they've done these things within their speech, really kind of hunkering in, listening for those words. But I also think, and why I have Vanna here, one of the most important things that's also very difficult, and let me tell you, I've been teaching speech for 20 years now. Many of you have taught it for that long or longer. Trying to teach students movement in a meaningful way is really hard, right? Like if I were standing up, I would do a little Carlton dance for you from my people from the 90s, right? That we get students who are doing these things, right? We're rocking back and forth, and we're having this sort of what I call unmeaningful movement, although it's nerves. And so we have to, coach our students and teach them. And when we're judging them, thinking about like, how do we help them to move from that type of movement to something that's meaningful, that still allows them to use their energies, right? And this is the thing that's so powerful to me. So if we're talking about transitions, right? If a student starts in the center of the room, right? Help them as they move through those main points to move to the right, transition back, move to the center for point B, move to the left for point C, move back to the center for the conclusion, right? That actual movement, what it does is it also shifts our own brain in thinking about how the student is progressing through these topics that they are talking to us about. So when you think about this, it's hard, right? It's really hard to connect these things. So one of the reasons that I'm including this slide, right, and thinking through this is that, and I'll talk about this at the end too, I think when we judge, we have a tendency to tell a student, okay, here's what you need to work on transitions, okay? What does that mean, right? What does that mean when you are 15 years old? Or 16 or 17, right? You need to work on your movement. Well, what does that mean? So really thinking through as a judge, how can I not only give this feedback, but how could I give them an opportunity to learn? Right. And here's how we can do this. I was looking around at my office yesterday and I'm thinking, okay, how do I connect three things that seem unrelated? Right. A highlighter, a magic 8 ball, and post-it notes. Right. These are all things on my desk. Okay. I do in fact have a magic 8 ball because I'm a little indecisive. And sometimes if a student sends me an email, I have to consult the magic 8 ball to see whether, they're telling the truth or not. Just kidding. sometimes. But so we think about that and then, think about this more serious topic, right? And I was going to have us all give this a try, but time and technology is not going to necessarily allow that. So if we think about raising the minimum wage as a topic, okay, many of your students, in this category aren't going to come to you as reading the New York Times every day. Some might, but I would guess that the large majority aren't, right? And so it's hard to not try to pick apart their arguments, but thinking about, again, a 15-year-old, these are very novice arguments. They don't necessarily see the intricacies, right? Or how things are connected. So they might say raising the minimum wage has a negative impact on small business, but it would have a positive impact on families. And you're thinking to yourself, wait a second, are you taking a side or are you not taking a side? Right? That's not where our judging lies. We can't judge the way that they are thinking. We have to judge the way that they are presenting and the way that they are presenting information in a logical way. So if they say, right, it's going to have a negative impact on small business, it would have a positive impact on families. And then maybe they could come to say, it would have a positive impact in rural communities, it would have a negative or a positive impact in urban communities, a negative impact in rural. I think that the thing is, we can look at spontaneous speaking as not a judgment, but as a place to share thoughts and ideas that don't necessarily agree. And I think that we can all probably agree, and especially in a political decisive year, that the sharing of ideas without judgment, but for the purpose of exploration, is so important, right? Let our young people sort of wrestle with these things and say things out loud that aren't necessarily connected, but that they're thinking, right? And the power of having them think in that way will supersede, right? So really thinking about how do they put these things together, okay? And how they make these sort of logical leaps and connections. So what does this all mean, right? When we talk about introductions and conclusions, if I'm judging a spontaneous speaking event, what I want to see, and I tell my own students this, is I want to see bookends, right? I always say this bookending of a speech. Your introduction should look like your conclusion, not word for word, right? But they should be connected in some way, right? And you'll see, right, this is my image of the two Scotty dogs, right? They are the same, but they're different. They are looking different ways. They are pointed different ways. And so when we think about how do we sort of tie it up, how do we introduce it? These are really important thoughts. If you think about things like you never make a second chance to make a first impression, that's about an introduction, okay? But again, with that, you could also say people remember what they hear last. So this is why introductions and conclusions are so important, right? In that you're introducing this thing, you're sort of wrapping it up, but you're tying these two ends together to make it nice and neat. All right. So we move on to this physical delivery. All right. What does this look like? Facial expressions, eye contact, notes, gestures, all of these things are really, really hard. And so what does it mean to have good facial expressions? Of course, we always talk about matching, right? Not smiling if something is sad, not being sad if something is happy. But then also that sometimes that can be valuable, right? A valuable way to sort of intrigue the audience and like what's really happening here. We feel like something is different. Things like, when we think about eye contact, I think when a student walks in a room, especially with spontaneous, you can see their confidence level right away. And so, how do we gauge what that eye contact should look like? Okay, we know that it should be balanced between the left and the right and the center side of the room, right? That there should be this sort of scanning nature. We know, right? Look at the tops of people's heads. No, don't do that. Don't do that. We know that you're looking here, right? For goodness sakes, don't do the whole like audience naked thing, because that, I mean, no, we aren't doing those things anymore, right? So how do we have a student come in and recognize essentially where they are and give them just the simple next step of that, right? So if a student walks in and is completely staring at their notes, okay, and maybe you get a glimpse of the eyes every now and then, we don't want to give them the advice of like balance the eye contact, and really, work on working the room. No. What we want to do is say, try to look at someone in the room that's familiar to you, right? Because that's the first step of getting their eyes up, right? And telling them to do this big thing feels really big and scary. So as a judge, we're not only judging, but we're trying to teach and trying to build confidence and taking that just one simple step over where they are. So then they come in and maybe they are not looking at their notes much, right? And they are scanning the room. What's the next thing that you could say? The next thing could say, really focus in on meeting people's eye gazes, right? Maybe they're doing a good scan, but they aren't really checking the gazes of their people, right? So then maybe that's the next step for that person. So really thinking about, again, where they are, where they're heading to. When we think about notes, okay, and I hope that we all do this. I was going to have something. Oh, good, I have one right here. Right, so they come in with these handy dandy note cards. One of my frustrations with note cards, a side note, for all of my speech classes that I teach at UNI, I don't allow students to have notes. Nope. Um, in this situation, absolutely, they need to have notes. But one of the reasons that I don't is because if students have practiced enough, right, they really shouldn't need this thing. They should be able to talk, right, from this place of research and this place of knowledge, right, that they are able to get this information out. But I will tell you, one of the beginning things that I do teach, the first speech, I guess I do get to use a new note card, is flipping it. And so, a tried and true, sort of practice, right? We have students holding this way. One of the quickest ways that you can help students, right? And we as judges too, is flip that, because then it fits in the hand, right? There's less opportunity for dropping. There's less opportunity, if you have several note cards, for all of the switching that needs to happen, because they rest nicely in their hand. It also can help to do a better job with gestures and movement, right? That if we're able to do these things, because the card is resting nicely here, rather than trying to hold it and do these things and have it wave around. So just a quick little tip that we can give as judges, that it just can sort of power up their presentations. So gestures and movement, of course, it's the same type of thing as eye contact, right? If a student is standing and, hands at their sides and they're just terrified, don't talk to them about free flowing movement from the shoulders out, right? Talk to them about getting a hand up every now and then, right? My first point, my second point, my third point. And again, we want them to be so great, but we also have to recognize where they are. Okay. So what is that next step, that next thing that can help them to be even better than what they are right now? All right. So moving on to depth of knowledge and this logical analysis, right? And I would go back to really thinking about, what did you know at 15? Right? And this is something I think, in all the years I've been teaching, and all of the, oh, kids these days, or this generation, and I think to myself, you know, I don't I don't know that I was even as responsible as my own children. My own children are incredibly responsible and, hold down two jobs while going to college. I didn't do those things. And so sometimes I think we have a tendency to put our own adult sort of expectations on them, right? Like, here's how I'm behaving. Here's how I'm doing this thing. So you should do that as well. And forgetting that, again, they've been on the earth for 16 years. So how do we take a step back and walk them through? So they did say something that maybe wasn't true in their spontaneous speaking. We could talk to them about, hey, tell me about where you heard that, right? Instead of coming to them and being judgmental or like that's inherently untrue, how do we come at them and say, tell me where you heard that. Tell me how you came up with that idea. And oftentimes, you're going to get the answer that's a little bit softer and also offers the opportunity for us to teach, right? As judges, offers the opportunity for us to teach these young people that we don't know. So I wanted to just stop real quick before I moved on to the next category for any thoughts or questions that anyone had. I know that the chat window is open, so I'm going to just pause for about 30 seconds.
And this would be a good time, friends. You can use that Q&A button, and that's at the downstage center stage. It says Q&A, and if you have any questions specifically about spontaneous, now would be a good time to type in that, and then I can relay that to Dr. Harkin. I love Dr. Harkin, how you can you repeat this. How can I give them the opportunity to learn? And I just
Yeah.
love reinforcement that absolutely in our association, we're an education-based association, and this is why we exist, is to help students learn. And I love your point of, as a judge, we're not judging their thinking in this category. We're not making a judgment on their thinking and all of their, little 15 years of life here on the earth, but rather we're giving them an opportunity to learn through their presentation. We're judging the presentation versus the material. And here are a couple of questions that are
Yeah. Okay.
that are coming in. What suggestions, advice would you give to a student who they just totally freeze after giving a development thought? They freeze.
Yeah, I always in these moments taking a breath, right? I think is the most powerful moment of like they stop, they freeze. Okay, just like put everything down, close your eyes, sort of, do this sort of like yoga recentering, right? Like take a big deep breath, right? Do a, even maybe offering students doing a little visualization, right? Like where were you? Okay. And, where do you want to head next? And I always think too that part of this comes from planning, right? When we teach our students that roadmap, okay, if you forget this piece, and it's one of the things, I know I talked about, that I don't allow my students to use note cards in my classes. I always tell them, I'm like, let's be honest, part of the real power of learning to speak like this is becoming sort of masterful in the art of BS, right? Like, I mean, there's some truth there. And so, knowing that thing well enough that you can just talk about it, right? Like, just because we all know, right? Like someone asked you the name of someone that you knew in high school and you have no idea. And then at 2 o'clock in the morning, when you get up to use the restroom, all of a sudden you're like, Hope. Hope is her name, right? And part of that is this letting your brain forget about the thing and be sort of in this stress moment and letting your brain relax so that it will come back to you. So I think big deep breaths and making sure that we encourage students to have that plan. And if you forget where you are, go to the next point, right?
Sure.
Go to the next.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead. Let's move on
Okay.
to our next category.
Yes, perfect.
Individual improv. Wow, these students, like spontaneous, they're so brave and
So brave.
so courageous. Just absolutely wow.
Could not agree more.
I know it. I know it.
I could not agree more. So this first category, within that judges sheet is really looking at sketch. And when I think about sketch, I think about story, right? So how are characters developed? How does the story look? How do we use transitions in that story? And how do we use sort of this material that we draw? So when we think about sketch, one of the first things that I really want to break down is the story, right? When we are teaching this, when we are judging this, we really have to remind students to go back to sort of like English 101 or, creative writing 101. We have to think about this story, right? Like the exposition part. How does this begin, right? What's the thing, the inciting event? What's the thing that happens? Right, that leads to the climax and this big thing, right? And then what happens because of that? And so when we are judging this, helping students and looking at their stories, have their stories been developed in such a way that this makes sense? Because the thing is that if they develop a story in this sort of tried and true way, and not that every story, every play, every narrative, every movie that we watch, it does not need to be in this order, right? And follow this path. But I will tell you that and we talk about this a lot at UNI. The We have to give students a structure that will make sense to them and help them in their life no matter what. Okay. So yes, not every speech is going to be an informative speech with an introduction that has an attention getter, a credibility statement, a preview, ABC main points, and then a review statement and a final closing impact statement. But if we teach them that, they have something that will work in 90% of the situations, especially if that's not their natural thing. So teaching students, right, to make sure that they follow sort of this narrative, this creative arc, right? The story talks about using creative materials, using the transitions, using the material given to them. And this is why I think that this is so important when we are judging, right? That we can ask students when they sit with us, tell me about, what was the inciting incident? What was the major thing that happened here? Right? What do you see as the climax? How can we help them to make that climax stronger? Right? How can we help them to think through what is the crisis that's happening between these two characters, or that these two characters are experiencing with the external world? What is this crisis? Right? And then how does it come to fruition? And then what happens? And I would tell you too that, just a personal point of view, this denouement, right, or this ending, I think that sometimes this is the hardest for students. And if you watch and you grade speeches and you judge speeches, students spend a lot of time thinking about the introduction, and we kind of forget about this ending, right? And it happens a lot. And what happens in, spontaneous speaking as well, they're like, "Ah, that's it. Like, I'm done." You're like, "Whoa, wait, what? We're done?" Okay. So we really, in thinking about, what happens afterwards? What's this part of the story that the student is telling? The development of character. We think about the development of character. There are some things I think we need to really be careful about, and really talk with students about, from coaches and judges and all of us all around. And how do we avoid negative stereotypes? Because I think that that is a really easy place for students to go. Um, using language that is not authentically their own, but may be important for character development in, maybe using someone who has a mental illness, and using the stereotypes and how we talk about people, how we think about people, how do we help students to create characters without characters being rooted in awful ideas? And I think it's all of our responsibility to really think about what I would call the spectrum of experience, right? That you can make a judgment, for instance, maybe about someone who has autism. Okay, so you have a person and you characterize them in that way, and so the person stands there and maybe they rock back and forth. They have some stimming characteristics. or, they lack eye contact. But the problem is, right, that we know, right, hopefully everybody in this room that like that's not everyone who has autism has those experiences. And so how do we help our young people? And by the way, what a great life skill, right? What a great life skill to have the opportunity. What a blessing and a privilege for us to have the opportunity to teach our young people about spectrum of experience and about not classifying people, when we do character development in these ways. And I would bet that our folks from the theater who are going to talk today will have some great advice on how we can do character development in a different way that doesn't especially put marginalized communities in harm's way, or extend sort of, you know, um, popular stereotypical thoughts about those in communities. Vocal delivery. So vocal delivery is always interesting to me because, how do we teach it? It's so hard, right? Like let's be honest, it's so hard. And it's so hard to judge because again, you don't necessarily know where students are coming from, what their experiences are, how much experience they have doing speech. I think, when you're judging, in my experience judging, you don't want to say it, but you're like, "Ooh, yeah, you're a novice. I can kind of tell." And that's okay, right? That's totally okay. But then you might have students in their first year who are just absolutely rocking and rolling their way through the speech program. And so really thinking about again, where are they and what is that next simple step? Right? That next simple step. Maybe it's someone they're speaking and their volume and their voice drops at the end of right. They speak a sentence, and every sentence they have, all of a sudden at the very end, you lose them. So that becomes the thing, right? Maybe we don't work with them on vocal variety. Maybe we work on them and like, hey, keep your volume steady, right? We always want to hear you. You can soften your voice for impact, but still have the volume itself. So, one of the things when I look at vocal delivery and improvisation, I think about how all of these ideas are really tied together in one sort of one box, which leads to this idea of vocal variety. Okay. So when I think about this, I think about, pronunciation and articulation, timing, pauses, and volume is all being interconnected, right? If our volume is up, right? Our articulation is probably going to be better. If we are pronouncing words, our articulation is going to be better. If we are having, using our time well and having good pauses, what we're doing is we're refilling our lungs to have good volume, which then allows us to be better at pronunciation and articulation. And all of those things, right? This is being these four core things we have to work on before we can even start talking about vocal variety, right? The highs of our voices and the lows of our voices and how we change the speed and the rate to make a point, right? Before we can even get there, we have to center in on these things that our voice does. And so really thinking about again how these are all really connected together. And in a moment of sort of self-reflection, I always struggled with speaking too fast, which you can probably tell now. I speak too fast in my personal life. I speak too fast in my teaching. I just am a fast talker. And it has caused harm. When I was in contests, this was always one of the judges' things. Slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down. Finally, I will say when I was probably a junior or senior in high school, my speech coach taught me about breath. And, music teachers, y'all are great at teaching about breath and the use of the diaphragm and breathing from your stomach and not from your chest. And when she taught me how sort of breathing worked, it made such a huge difference to me to understand how to keep my volume up, even if I'm talking quickly. Because my problem was if I was talking quickly, but then I was, mixing up words, right? And I wasn't using timing and all of these things. So when I learned that, it was life-changing to me, right? So how can we as judges really help students to think about, right, that your breath comes from your belly? That's what gives you right? The output to do these other things well. It doesn't necessarily come from our chest breathing, which is how we breathe sort of to stay alive, right? And a daily basis. So, when we think about how to teach students to do these things and how to comment, if you notice a student is mispronouncing, is that rooted in not knowing the word, or is that rooted in speaking too quickly? Is that, is the lack of volume related to confidence, or is it related to the lack of air? What do we see as we are watching the student, right? Are we watching their chest, right? Are we watching how they are breathing, how they are taking these pauses? Because that, in a way, is where we can really help them. All right. And we talk about physical delivery, these same types of ideas, right? These bodily actions, facial expressions, characters, the consistency of characterization, right? Remaining consistent in who we are, and how we are developing those characters is incredibly important as we work through those ideas. So when we think about that, what does it mean? And as I was looking at this and I've been thinking about it for a couple of weeks, I just kept thinking about consistency. How do we teach students, and how do we encourage them? How do we judge them on consistency, on, essentially the not breaking of character is what we want to see, right? Consistency, consistency, consistency. You have one situation, you have two characters, right? How do we think through, again, that narrative story arc in one situation and two characters? We don't need to make it more complicated than that, right? And so I think as we judge students, continuously encouraging them, it doesn't have to be complicated to be good, right? I mean, I think about rom-coms, okay? I love rom-coms. I don't know how many of you out there love rom-coms. I know some people hate them. I love them because they're predictable. My parents are huge Hallmark movie watchers, and I understand why, right? They're in their 70s, and they again live on a farm in East Central Iowa, the farm I grew up on. And one night I was there and I was watching it with my dad, and I will never forget it. He was like, "Well, here's about what's to happen. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen." So she's now going to recognize, right, that this guy actually really does care about her. And I couldn't stop laughing because my dad is like the least emotional guy I've ever met in my life. And here's this like 76-year-old man breaking down this Hallmark movie. But I'm like, it's the narrative arc. That's what he's doing, and it's simple and it's consistent and you can count on it. And so I think, maybe students have a tendency to think, well, I should do this or I should do this and include this. No, no, keep it, right? Keep it simple, stupid. KISS principle. Keep it simple. One situation, two characters, build a great story for that and that alone. That's all we need to do. And so, really, as you're judging, watching them sort of move off of those paths and try to make something bigger than what it ever needs to be. Okay. And then finally, of course, the overall performance effectiveness, right? Are you moved by the thing? I love to be moved, right? And the thing is, back to the rom-coms, I'm such an easy sell when it comes to going to the movies. Like, I just want to eat my popcorn and drink my Diet Coke and be whisked away to a magical world where I don't have to think, and where I don't, where there are like birds doing my laundry. That'd be lovely. So this overall performance effectiveness, how do all of these things work together, right? What kind of feedback can we give students based on this, how this all works together? Okay. So, moving on, I'd like to talk just a little bit about feedback in itself, because I think as judges, and this is 30 years ago for me, right? And being judged, but I can still remember kind of some of the sting of, a comment, but then I'd be like, but I don't understand really what they meant by that. And so, I always think that, districts is such a special moment because you really get to sit with that student and get to think about it. And it's much harder to do at the state level where you're just trying to write things and, things can be misinterpreted. And so I really want to focus right now on sort of these district level ideas of the compliment sandwich. And hopefully we all know what this is. But I love to think about the compliment sandwich in a way in which it really exists, right? So that first thing when the student sits beside us, give them a nice fluffy piece of white bread. This is not a white bread sandwich. I couldn't find one that was in Creative Commons. But that nice fluffy piece of white bread, right? Everybody really likes it. Feels good. It goes good with everything. You can put ham on it. You can put peanut butter on it. It just is, it's well loved and it's well liked and it's cheap and it's available. But it brings the person in, right? In the first compliment, right? Like something as much as you are so brave for taking on this category. Compliment one, right? Easy compliment, easy white bread compliment, right? You're so brave. And then move to the meat, right? And the cheese, right? Here are some things that I think that you could work on, right? Here are things that you could work on. And when I say here are things that you could work on, and I know I've touched on this a little bit already, but really thinking through the how. We can't, as judges, just say, you need to work on your introduction. You need to work on your conclusion. Well, what specifically would you like them to work on? I think about, my son was at a basketball practice and I think he was in middle school. He was like in eighth grade. And it was so funny because his coach caught me and said, and they're a family friend, and he said to me, Nikki, Tucker is just like, he's making me a better coach just by who he is. And oh, you never know, right? As a parent, you're like, is this good? Is this bad? What's happening? And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, he came down, he got a rebound and he brought it back down to the other side of the floor. And I said, good job, Tucker. And he said, Tucker stops in the middle of the game and he looks at me and he says, good job doing what? Good job catching the ball. Good job getting the rebound. Good job dribbling. Good job dribbling the right direction. Good job finding another player. So I went through this whole list of things. I'm like, yeah, it sounds like my kid. And Mrs. Fife, who's on here, also knows my kid because she taught them. And I just thought, man, that is such a great example of what we should do as coaches and what we should do as teachers. This specificity. What is it that you can do better? What is this thing, right? Not just like you did a good job at this.
Mhm.
You need to do better on your conclusion. What about it? Do you need to slow down more in your voice? Do you need to take more pauses? Do you need to connect back to the introduction, right? What is the specific thing? We have to teach students the how, right? And tell them the how, not just the thing that they need to do. So I'm going to go ahead now. I see I just have a few more minutes here. Thoughts and questions, right, on any of these ideas, spontaneous speaking, improv, feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm certainly not a, know all be all of these categories or events. And so I think this is such a great opportunity to share things that maybe, if we have coaches here, things that you've seen that have come back that maybe hurt students. I think that this is a good sharing space.
And Dr. Harkin, you are absolutely so specific in the types of specific advice that absolutely we need to be offering our students. I appreciate that you included the comment sheet throughout your presentation, and I can see you've gone step by step through the comment sheet. I also appreciate you keep on going back to the care of our students, specifically in improv. That consistency point is so valuable, so very, very, very valuable. A couple of questions for you. How
Yeah.
do you help, Dr. Harkin, how do you help students whose conflict, oops, and it went away from me. It looks like it was answered. I'm so sorry. Looks like it was answered by another member of our team privately. Here's another one for you. Some students choose impromptu categories because they think there's less preparation and they don't have to practice
Oh,
and
right.
they don't have to rehearse as much. From your experience as a judge, so this is a judge versus a
Mhm.
coach. What would be ways, perhaps through a judge lens, that you might be able to help the coach that you do? You still need
Right.
to rehearse. How do you
Yes.
rehearse?
So I would actually, Stacey, that's a great question. I would go back to that, you know, we need to have a standard introduction. We need to know how to move through 3 points. We need to have a standard conclusion, especially in spontaneous speaking, right? That you can tell as a judge when someone hasn't thought through, okay, what do I like? What are the nuts and bolts of this thing? Right? Like if you're missing the nuts and bolts of either spontaneous or improv, right? Whether that's the sort of, ABC outline or this narrative arc, you see that as a judge. I mean, almost immediately because things just fall apart and things don't make sense and things there's no path, there's no tracking of the things. And so I think from a judge's point of view, that's a really easy moment to ask students, right? Like, tell me about how you've practiced these things because these are but you can couch that in a way like these are really hard categories. Tell me about how you practice these things. That gives students the moment to be like, well, I really don't. Okay, well, here's how I think some more practice would help you. And even if and it's one of the reasons that I put that example in there with the magic 8 ball and the highlighter. Like, those are great things that you could say to a student, like, I have these 3 things on my judging desk. How would you connect a note card, a highlighter, and a Diet Coke? Right? Let's take 30 seconds and do that together. Right. And so then they can see sort of the value of that practice. And also you as a judge is having that essential power, right? To
Sure.
say there are structures here, nuts and bolts, that will help you to not get lost and to feel more confident in these categories.
Thank you. Another question for you, Dr. Harkin. Um, as a judge, how do you care for those students that even in positive feedback, they start to tear up? You know,
Yep.
as you're having that one-on-one and it's those nerves, it's that adrenaline, advice of you're a judge and the student starts to tear up, whether it's positive or improvement, you start to see those emotions. Help us
Yep.
out though.
I think we always have to remember that's adrenaline. That's all
Mhm.
that is, right? I mean, when you're giving negative feedback, that could be something else, but really that's the release of emotion, right? If we go back to, and I'm not going to get too geeky here, right? But the root word of emotion is motere, to move, right? That is the way that the word emotion is written. And so we need emotion to move us to do something. And so when we think about that, a student has been moved to do this thing. And so now they're sitting beside you and the emotion lets loose, right? That they've like held it together, whether it's positive or negative. So I think affirming that, you just have to affirm it and right, like, you just did this really hard thing. It's okay. And maybe always just have Kleenexes, right? And offer one, right? Or chocolate or whatever, right? Like, hey, here you go, right? And let them kind of compose themselves, give themselves the moment, right? But affirm it, right? Because the moment that we say things like, oh, there's no need to cry, that's not great and it's not helpful and it won't help them stop crying, right? So affirming that it's okay to have whatever emotion that you are having right now. It's not my place to dictate what you're feeling, right? So affirming that feeling and then sort of helping them to move through that.
Thank you, Dr. Harkin. And what a joy and a pleasure to have you here with our IHSSA family. I trust I will be sending out Dr. Harkin's beautiful and well put together slides about spontaneous and improv, and I will be sure to include all of your contact information with our community. Thank you
Perfect. Yes.
so very
Yes.
kindly,
So I
Dr.
wanted to just wrap this up because this is
Absolutely.
what we should do, right? We should bookend our speeches. So in the beginning, I talked about my high school experience, which then of course has led to my career in speech and in communication. I'm so happy to connect with any and all of you. I'm going to take a quick screenshot so that I can post you all on the LinkedIn. feel free to contact or connect with me. I'd love to chat with you. I love talking to high school classes. So if we have coaches on here, or teachers of other areas, would love to Zoom into your classes and chat with all of you. So thank you again so much for this invite. It has been absolutely my pleasure to come back and give back to the organization that gave me so much.
Thank you, Dr. Harkin. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, friends, we will go ahead and move on to our large group presenter in the area of ensemble acting. And we have from Iowa City and Riverside Theater, we have Adam Knight here. So good to see you, Adam. Thank you. Are
So
you
great to be with you.
Wonderful. I appreciate you spending your Saturday morning with our IHSSA family. Adam Knight, friends, he is the producing artistic director of Riverside Theater in Iowa City. He received a BS in theater with an associated study in literature from the University of Evansville in Indiana, and then moved to New York City at the ripe age of 21 to work at Signature Theater. He went on to co-found Slant Theater Project, the Slant Theater Project. His directing and professional credits include the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, Ars Nova Ensemble Studio Theater, New Harmony Project, the Primary Stages, PS 122, the Lark O'Neill Playwrights Conference, and Williamstown Theater Festival, along with so many. Wow, he is just robust and overflowing with so many generous theater experiences. In 2018, Adam moved to Iowa City to join Riverside Theater. It is Eastern Iowa's only professional resident theater company where he has produced and or directed over 44 productions. Adam lives in Iowa City with his wife, Mary Jane, and their two amazing stepchildren. Adam, thank you for being here and joining us. Obviously, you're visiting today about ensemble acting, but I know there's going to be so much yumminess that can apply to judges in all areas. So you're driving, Adam.
Well, yay. Thanks so much for having me, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. It's really just an honor and slightly nerve-wracking to be with you because as I mentioned in the pre-talk, I didn't do speech in high school, and so I feel like I'm like talking to these people that kind of know the magic, and I don't know that I know the magic, but as Stacy mentioned, I've been doing theater for a long time. The ripe age of 21 was further away from me than the age of 21 was to my birth. So I would say I've been doing theater the majority of my life. I certainly came to theater as a high schooler, and those early directors and mentors and judges were very important to my development as an artist and to the art I still strive to create. As Stacy mentioned, I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina. I went to the University of Evansville in Indiana. Fun fact, some of my classmates, one of my classmates won an Academy Award, Rami Malek, for Bohemian Rhapsody, and also was at school with Kelly Giddish, who's on Law and Order SVU, and it was a good class. And then I moved to New York City. I mostly worked in the not-for-profit theater world, helping theaters deal with labor issues a lot of the times. And then I was doing a lot of assisting in New York at places like Manhattan Theater Club and Williamstown Theater Festival. And then I ran a theater company for more than a decade called Slant Theater Project. We did a lot of world premieres. We did a lot of very bare bones theater off Broadway. And it was a great, I think, playground for me and for my colleagues to really discover what we believed in terms of what great theater is, but also to learn that great theater doesn't need, a huge set or amazing costumes. It needs real connection between one actor to another. And that's the kind of theater I'm drawn to. It's the kind of theater I think that Riverside Theater does, and what brought me to Iowa. I had never been to Iowa before I interviewed for this job. Vince Haraski, who's on this Zoom call, was one of the first people I met. He was actually on the board at Riverside when I was hired. And I remember when I accepted the job, I was at a bar in New York, and I told the bartender I was moving to Iowa, and his response was, "What are you, going into witness protection or something?" And I think that was the response of a lot of people. But what I believe firmly is that great theater can live anywhere. And that's why I very much believe in the mission of this organization to encourage great acting, which I really believe can live in any county and any school and any student if they're open to it and work towards it. Here's a little bit about Riverside Theater. We were founded in 1981 by Jody Hovland, Ron Clark, and Bruce Wheaton. We remain one of the only fully professional, if not maybe the only fully professional resident theater in the state of Iowa, though there's a lot of different definitions about all of that. We've produced more than 300 shows in our 40 plus seasons, including 36 world premieres. We're the only Iowa City member of Theater Communications Group and the only Iowa-based member of the National New Play Network. And every summer we produce free Shakespeare in Lower City Park. So if you're ever so inclined to drive to beautiful Iowa City and see a free Shakespeare show under the beautiful Iowa sky, please do join us there. I guess I'll say that the idea of speaking about how I can judge ensemble acting is a pretty stressful question for me. Part of me is inclined to quote Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, who has a famous quote in a concurrent opinion in a landmark obscenity case. He says, "I shall not attempt further to define the kinds of material I understand to be embraced, ... but I know it when I see it." And I guess my inclination sometimes to talk about great acting is, well, I know it when I see it. But obviously, that's not the task given to you, the judges. You're given evaluation forms with things like characterization, vocal and physical delivery, ensemble effect, and you can't just say something is good because you see it. So I guess before I dive into specific things that I've learned over the years, I think it was important in preparing this talk to define for myself what I think good acting is. I think that acting is an individual's attempt to find meaning by playing a character and committing to imaginary circumstances, and in doing so, telling a story that is bigger than themselves. We come to this form, I think, because it stretches us. Many of us have everyday lives involving grass mowing or errand running or shopping at the Hy-Vee, but plays seldom take place in a Hy-Vee. From Greek times to the now, plays tend to gravitate towards huge stories. Sometimes these stories are about national or mythical heroes like Odysseus Rex or Henry V. And other times, especially in the modern age, they're about everyday people facing extraordinary moments. Nora in Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, making the pivotal decision to leave her husband and slam the door. Or Faye in Dominique Morisseau's Skeleton Crew, deciding that the health of her co-workers was worth her own happiness and job security. And these plays are about more than just one person. The household that orbits Nora and how it is a microcosm of the patriarchy, or the chorus in Thebes begging their ruler for an answer to the plague that's affecting their city. Great acting and great ensembles tell great stories. And so if I would say the first thing I look for, and maybe my first bit of advice for you before anything else, is to listen to the story being told, to be open to that story. Are the actors invested in it? Are they invested in it so much that they seem moved by it? Are you moved by it? And can we evaluate why or why not? The craft of acting in many ways was a mystery for most of history. The skills were honed within companies where there was no codified method, beyond the need to have a strong voice in an age where amplification didn't exist. And I guess it always helped to be able to move well. That changed around the turn of the century with a fellow named Konstantin Stanislavski, who some of you have probably heard of, or as I like to call him, Stan the Man. Let me see if I can move it forward here. There we go. He ran the Moscow Art Theater for several decades. And Stanislavski collected and inspired many of the ways to teach acting today. His work influenced great American teachers such as Stella Adler and Lee Strasberg, who brought method acting to Hollywood. Now, we obviously don't have time to go through Stanislavski's teachings, but on a very basic level, he was trying to create a consistent method for actors to create work, rather than just simply being performative, or as our previous presenter said, resorting to stereotypes. And for him, that was about finding truth in imaginary circumstances. He would have his students play games such as like imagining that their seat was actually a hot iron, or pretending that some tragic accident had occurred to a loved one, and then using those imaginary techniques to build a character's journey throughout a play. A big key to this type of acting is actions and objectives. He said that physical action is the key to unlocking emotional action. Why physical action? Because it's easier for us to control. Emotional action is kind of locked in the mystery of soul and self. But anyone can pick up a blanket and drape it over a chair. But if then you can decide that the blanket is actually this object that was your sister's before she died of malaria, all of a sudden that action has emotional meaning. But at the end of the day, you're still just doing this one physical action. He also broke plays and scenes into beats, or it might have been actually mistranslated as bits. He was Eastern European after all, so beats and bits sometimes gets a little confused. But on a very basic level, rather than seeing a scene as one big thing, he encouraged actors, and I think viewers too, to look at it as a series of little things that build to a big whole. Lines are usually connected to underlying actions, right? So you're not just saying a line to be heard, you're saying a line because you want to do something to the other person. You want to affect them in some way. And then these actions build towards an overarching objective for the character. So, the actor wants something. They want something in life. They want something in this scene. And so that objective is part of what builds the character, and it also builds the drama of the story, right? Because what someone wants might be different than what someone else wants, and that's conflict. There's a playwright named Mark Ravenhill who has who I think defines dramatic action really well. He says, "What is dramatic action? What the characters on stage do to resist change, negotiate with change, initiate change the other characters, change the situation they're in. In a theater play, the characters primarily do this through active use of words. So with almost every line in a scene, an actor should be going after something. It could be to, they want someone to love them, or they want to, punish someone for hurting them, or they want to, build someone up, or they want to shower affection on somebody. But every line has an opportunity for action. In fact, I think that sometimes there's opportunities for action not even on lines. they can be underneath moments of silence or listening. Once I had a young actor playing Tuzenbach in Three Sisters by Anton Chekhov, and he was sitting next to his beloved Irina, but he had no lines. And I asked him what he was doing in that scene, and he said he thought he was listening. And I said, yes, but aren't you also trying to will Irina to show you some shred of affection because you know that in 10 minutes you're going off to a duel in which you will probably die? And he thought about it and said, yeah, that's probably a better action to play. That's the opportunities that Stanislavski's teachings bring to the stage. They can activate moments beneath the surface. They can add complexity, and they can tell a story that's not just about one person, but about an ensemble of people all fighting in some manner for an objective that may be in conflict with someone else's objective. Great actions are often built upon given circumstances. They come from the story and from the world of the play and the relationships that inhabit it. A lot of my work as a director is about creating the world of the ensemble to play in. And a big part of that is creating the rules of the world, which are often established using the tools described in the physical delivery section of your evaluation forms. I often start in terms of my directing thought with thinking about a table, right? Who sits where? Often I think younger actors or more inexperienced directors just kind of think that people sit anywhere at a table and people get up and then they move to other seats at a table and there's no kind of rhyme or reason to it. But if you think about your own worlds, tables have a lot of emotional meaning. You know, who's sitting at the center of the who's sitting at the head of the table? We almost never sit in seats that aren't our spots, you know, at dinner time. And I kind of ask you as you're watching scenes that might take place around a table, does the staging convey information about the plots and characters? This was a scene from Uncle Vanya, and Vanya, who happens to be sitting downstage, is actually the most important person in this scene, but he was seated at the weakest staging point. And that kind of weakness actually adds to his frustration, right? Because he feels like he should be at the head of the table and instead he's not. And so using, I think, these limitations for dramatic effect, I think is something to really look out for. Here's another example. This is a bar in the play The Weir, and it's an Irish bar. And in this world, three of these folks here are here almost every day, and they're regulars. Another used to come in a lot before he made his fortune, so he's kind of the big man around town. And then the young woman is new to town. You know, where do they sit? How do they interact with the world around them? For some people, this world is very familiar. For others, they might need to take it in. And so one thing I think to look for is, you know, who is new to this world? You know, if this is a new place, are they finding moments to look around, to take it in? I know that these worlds are not actually realized by sets, but I think there are opportunities for the actors to live in this space. Or is it a world in which they're very comfortable? Is this a world in which they're familiar? What's their relationship to the physical world around them? This is another example from a play called The Price, which was my first play in Iowa. And two brothers are on stage, and you know, who's the one in control? You know, in this case, it's the one standing. And then there's one who's kind of relegated to kind of a corner of the room. Also, are there any kind of spaces that are not being used? And what's important there? In this case, there was a chair that was almost dead center stage that no one sat in. And the reason why no one sat in it is because it was the deceased father's chair. And so as they're talking about this person who's not on stage, this chair starts to have more and more meaning. So, you know, is there interesting use of negative space? Are there any areas where the actors have imbued meaning to the world? Also, you know, I think one question is, you know, what happens when someone enters or exits a space? I'll go back to Mark Ravenhill, who says, A new character entering should be like someone stepping onto a dinghy. Everyone in the dinghy has to reposition themselves to find a new balance or they'll capsize. The action of the scene is the negotiation of that repositioning. Same for an exit. So one thing to look out for is when someone enters a scene, are the other actors responding, or do they just keep going and don't notice that person? Pay attention, I think, to yourself. When someone enters, you always look towards the room. You respond in some way. Ditto, when someone enters a new space, they get their bearings. They kind of figure out where they're going before they go. They don't just enter and go straight there. And so I think look for those little moments where the actors find little moments of truth in the behavior of entering or exiting or responding to someone coming or going. Decorum, and this kind of has to do with space too. And of course, this is not a scene from theater, but this is a scene from the great movie Heat with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. This scene takes place in a restaurant, in a cafe. And I think that one of the things that's so powerful about this scene is, this is an action movie, right? And they're running around shooting people and getting into fights, but they're forced to be very still and to talk to people, talk to each other as if, because they're in a restaurant. They don't want people staring. They don't want people calling the cops, right? And so there's power in that limitation and kind of the rules of this world. Sometimes a play might take place in a restaurant, say, or a cafe. And if the actors are flailing all about or moving from table to table or sitting on the tables, that doesn't have any sense of place. They're not using the kind of parameters of the space for dramatic effect. And so, what I also always ask myself is like, what are the manners that this scene requires? And do I believe that these people are actually in the space that they're at? This is a scene from A Case for the Existence of God by Samuel D. Hunter. It's a person coming into an office and applying for a mortgage. And, it's a semi-public space, right? And a big question we had is kind of how big can we make it? You can kind of go to a place and it's kind of awkward, right? But if you go too big, it stops being believable. And so kind of finding power in that kind of pressure chamber situation can really activate a scene. This is another example. It's a play called The Niceties. And it's a professor's office, right? And so one person is behind the desk and the other is in a weaker position sitting on the other side of the desk, right? And so the actors don't just kind of move all around. The student, in this case, would never go behind the desk or behind the professor. And so everyone's kind of a little bit trapped in their kind of power positions, right? And so the more that an actor can kind of live in the reality of this world, the more I think it gives them an opportunity to find meaning in the rules of the space. And kind of ditto, sometimes in a scene that the rules change, right? Maybe the professor goes to the other side of the desk and all of a sudden, oh, wow, it's a different scene. And so all of a sudden the power dynamics have shifted. They're on more equal footing now. And so paying attention to those shifts and how the rules of the world can kind of bend, I think gives more vocabulary for describing what you're seeing and what's ringing true, or maybe in some cases not ringing true. A lot of this kind of bleeds into character, right, and characterization. Going back to our friend Stanislavski, he says, a character has to have some kind of arc, or he may have actually said arch, but again, translation. A character has to have some kind of arc. A character has to go through an event and be changed by a human event. And so as we're looking at characterization and acting, one of the things we're looking at is, are they different from the top of the scene to the end of the scene? Are we seeing a journey even in these 10 to 15 minutes that of the scene we're watching? Or have the characters all stayed exactly the same? Theater tends to be about people going through change. I think it's I think it's easy to kind of play the scene where everyone's yelling at one another, right? And kind of to play those big emotions. But it's sometimes challenging to have that same character be in a passive role, to be getting advice from their father. And I think really pay attention to, can an actor play both? Are they finding different levels in this world? I loved what I was hearing in the previous presentation about avoiding stereotypes. And I think that often comes into play when actors are asked to play characters that are unfamiliar to them, or in some cases, famous characters. Stanislavski says, avoid falseness. Avoid everything that is beyond your powers as yet, which is also to say, if you don't know if you've never been, a warrior king, that's okay. You don't have to play your stereotype of what that is. You just have to find a moment of truth within this. Don't just kind of try to exaggerate and to lie. And so how can we find little moments of truth in these stories that are bigger than any one of us? That often happens when we're playing famous characters, right? This is a scene from The Agitators, which was about Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony. But it takes place they're watching a baseball game, right? So it's a wonderful example of it's not like this famous person is just emoting famous things constantly. They're having real responses to something that we can all relate to, which is watching a sporting event. Also, I love this scene because it's an example of decorum, right? You're in a public space, you're watching something, but you're also talking to one another. So if we're watching a movie or we're watching a sporting event, we don't just kind of sit and talk only to the person we're talking to. Often we're watching something, kind of checking in with other people, but kind of have dual focus. So I love that challenge as an actor, and I think that's something to really look out for. If something else is happening off stage, that's almost a character in the play too. And so are the actors connecting with each other, but also connecting with this external event? This is another example of famous characters, right? This is a scene in which Thomas Jefferson, Count Leo Tolstoy, and Charles Dickens find themselves trapped in a strange escape room in the afterlife. And so we kind of know who these famous characters are. Often students are asked to play famous characters in plays, but can they find moments of truth in them? Can they find themselves in those characters, or are they just kind of playing an idea of these characters? And so, just looking for those little nuggets of truth, I think is part of what great theater is about. Oftentimes, actors are asked to play different ages, right? So even in a scene, there might be a flashback to a younger version of themselves, or they might be playing kids. So again, kind of how do you avoid the stereotyping of that, and how do you kind of find the through line of that? So this is an example of a play in which here the brother and his sister are in a tree, and then the same brother and another person are in a car together. But then the play in the present is about two of those characters in adulthood talking. And so we go through these flashbacks, and I think, can we see the through line of those, and can the actors find specificity and physicalization that allows that story to be told? Another thing that I love to look for, and I encourage in actors, is finding what I sometimes say is like playing the opposite, right? Stanislavski says, when playing someone who is cruel, look for places of kindness. And so, are you finding an actor who's playing, Thomas Jefferson or Charles Dickens, finding a moment of silliness or of banality? Are you finding, or Frederick Douglass, being more interested in a baseball game than in talking to Susan B. Anthony? Are there moments of silliness? Are there moments of complexity? It's easy to think of a villain as only a villain, but I think that Lady Macbeth or Richard III can be actually quite charming and interesting too. And great actors can find those kind of opposites and almost revel in them. And I think that's the stuff of really good performances. I think that kind of dovetails a little bit into moments of tenderness and joy and intimacy. Sometimes an embrace can actually come out of a moment of deep pain. And so if we've established what these stories are, and then that tension kind of finally is broken by an embrace, it feels very earned. The embrace is actually not what's important. It's the kind of culmination of these tensions finding one another. And I kind of also love in this picture, there's this third person, right, watching, and kind of how are they responding to this embrace. This is another example from Winter's Tale and this kind of wonderful festive dancing. And then you've got this character in the background watching. And I think really great ensemble acting is something where there's this kind of there's kind of what's happening in the forefront, but also everyone on stage is part of that same scene in some way. This is another example from that play that took place in an office, right? And these two people now out of an office, now actually kind of in the play, they're actually in nature in this scene. But kind of finding one another and trying to talk through this pain. I think in real life and in great plays, these moments are seldom cheesy and they're not like greeting cards. And so really responding to and encouraging actors who find the complexity in these moments, I think has real power. I think that real life and great theater is seldom simple. And so oftentimes as younger performers, we maybe haven't experienced great pain or we haven't experienced great love. And so there's a desire to kind of do what we've seen in movies, right? But if you can find an actor who is really just trying to make it personal to them, and maybe they're not going to a 10, maybe they're only able to go to a 5 in terms of energy, but if it's coming from a real place, I think that's something to be greatly encouraged, versus kind of being loud and going there, where it's sometimes maybe coming from a place of falseness. One kind of pet peeve of mine, but also I think this kind of goes into the vocal delivery land, has to do with broken lines. A lot of plays, especially modern plays, have this, right? Where someone's talking and then someone's trying to get a word in edgewise, but they can't. Or in other cases, there's a moment where someone's being interrupted. And, are you getting a sense that the actor will continue this action? Would they keep talking if the other person hadn't have interrupted them? Or are they just kind of waiting to be interrupted because they don't actually know what they're going to be saying after that? In the case of this character, Zoe, is she trying to say something with the yeah? Is there an action underneath it? Or is she just saying it because that's what's in the script? And so I think that's a moment to really look for that connection and the real listening between the two characters. It's also a moment to highlight whether there's an action actually being played underneath these lines. Another example of this is a false exit, right? Someone tries to leave and they're stopped. Maybe they're stopped by someone saying, no, wait, come back. Or maybe they're stopped physically by someone blocking the way. Do you sense that that person was actually going to leave, or are they just kind of walking and then they stop? And sometimes no one stops you, right? Sometimes you're walking and then you decide to come back. And so just looking for those decision markers or moments where someone's actions actually affect them, I think is really exciting. Stanislavski also kind of talks about the power of accidents, right? Like someone sneezes or a chair falls over that wasn't planned for. And do the actors on stage respond to that, or do they just keep going? And for my money, I think it's powerful when someone responds to an accident. In the world of the play, people sneeze in real life. How would you respond to it? You might just pause and then keep going, or offer them to wipe their nose or something. But there is, I think, power in just being present on stage and listening to what's happening. A great teacher for me once said that blocking is meaning, and finding the motivation behind that, behind the staging, I think is really important. So to the extent that actors can find motivation in everything they're doing, and even if it's just kind of setting up a chair or sitting down even, that can be a building block towards a great performance. Of course, one of the big things about what we're doing here is looking at ensemble and that kind of ensemble effect, which I think of as kind of the big kind of overarching thing that you've been watching this whole time. This is an example of a play called Men on Boats. Are there moments where everyone seems to come together? If there's harmony in the world, and in some ways the characters kind of bleed into each other. I love moments in plays where the stakes are lower, where the kind of defenses have come down a little bit. These are usually the places earlier in the plays where relationships get established, where we kind of learn about the world, where we learn who these people are to one another. And if you're lucky, and I think this is something to look out for, you might see a little hint of a spark that then pays off 10 minutes later, right? A little annoyance, say, between character A and character C that will later become the flame that ignites the inferno of drama. And indeed, I think these lighter moments of an ensemble are the hardest for younger performers to play, right? Because they don't have the intense actions to grab onto. It's kind of easy to like, I hate you, but it's harder to be like, oh, look at that sun over there. And, remember the time when we were all, camping together 10 years ago. I think it's all the more reason, I think, as judges to give a little extra love to these scenes and finding ways for them to be activated and be strengthened. And then, of course, there's those dramatic moments, right? The moments where the group on stage is in conflict. Sometimes it's between two groups, sometimes it's between even more. And to pay attention to what the stakes are. Are the stakes skewed correctly? Sometimes the stakes don't always need to be a 10. Sometimes the stakes can be a great 6, and that's actually what the scene wants. Or, and certainly if it goes to a 10, it shouldn't be at a 10 on page 1. And so again, we're kind of talking about an arc, right? We're talking about rising action. Has it been building to a climax? Have these little things that have happened in the first 10 minutes are they now starting to kind of build into something that's coming to that climactic moment? Have we established the world? Have we established the rules of the world in which now we're kind of able to break them or push them even further? Are we finding any moments of unexpected or undeniably human elements in these stories? Are we finding a moment of levity in the moment of great drama? Is there a moment of awkwardness between two people who've been serious this whole time? Is it all one note, or is there a complexity to this intensity? I don't really have time to talk about comedy, but comedy has the same rules, right? It still has just as much of a need for human relationships, for intensity, for nuance as drama. And it still needs to have rising action and climax. So I think that these rules apply to comedy too. When you get into farce land, right, the stakes are a little different, right? You know, sometimes, you know, you can't die today because you have your parking pass, and if you don't get back within 5 hours, they're going to charge you $20. And so it's not, so life and death becomes a kind of different kind of stakes. But I think these same rules often apply. One thing I love about ensemble work is the big speech, right? Almost every play has a big speech. And so you've got an actor, hopefully their strongest actor, giving the speech, and hopefully they're opening up and finding ways to face downstage. But I think really pay attention to whether or not they're still connected to the other people in the room. You know, are they checking in with their partners? Maybe they're recounting some major memory, but are they making sure that other people are listening? Or if they're not, if they're so totally lost in this memory, how are the other people responding to that? Also, are the other people on stage connected to what's being said? How is it affecting them? Are they different at the end of the story than they were at the beginning of the story? Always, I think, with a long monologue or speech, especially if it's a memory, you know, ask yourself, is there an action underneath? What are they trying to do with the story? Or are they just trying to recount something, which is not a very actionable thing to play? Is there an urgency to it? Why this need to tell this story in this moment? And if they can tap into that need, that can really activate the telling of it. You know, often when an actor does not have an action beneath the words, that's when things like pauses feel missing, or the speech kind of seems a little bit by rote, like you can almost see the actor reading it on a page, and the timing gets off, and that's because it's existing in their head and not in the world of the play. This is an example from Julius Caesar, right? And I love this photo from rehearsals because you can really see how every actor is responding differently to this world, right? You know, one person's crying, another person's kind of holding maybe their sibling or their child. Some people are kind of awestruck, some people are maybe angry, and I think that, you know, everyone's reactions do not have to be the same. And in fact, there can be something really exciting when an ensemble is sometimes responding differently to something, and then what happens when they all come together. And because crowds are not often, or groups of people are not often all on the same page all the time. And so part of the fun of these scenes in which a group of people is listening is, are there times when the energy is dispersed, and when is the energy really focused? I guess in preparing this, I've been thinking back to my earlier definition of acting, and maybe amending it for an ensemble work. I think acting is an individual's attempt to find meaning by playing characters, and committing to imaginary circumstances, and doing so, telling a story that's bigger than any one person. So let's take individuals out of that. And acting is an attempt to find meaning by playing characters and committing to imaginary circumstances. In my career, I've tried to find meaning in this thing we call theater. I've tried to bring small moments of truth to the stage, and in doing so, I've hoped to have my audience grow. But it's also been a personal journey for me, and a personal journey of growth. I think great artists find something personal in what they're doing. That, for me, is the meaning we are all searching for. I think that many, if not all, of the students that you'll be seeing came into this wanting to find something or to tell a story that's bigger than themselves in this art. And now you are a part of that journey. So I maybe leave you with another quote from Stan the Man, Stanislavski. He says, to arouse a desire to create is difficult. To kill that desire is extremely easy. And we happen to find ourselves in a position to support that desire, that hard-fought desire that's brought these people to the stage. We also, I think, have the ability to possibly snuff out that desire. And so, using this time, I think, to really encourage actors to find themselves and to find little moments of truth in these scenes, I think will pay off for their personal growth and hopefully for the growth of this art. Thank you.
Beautifully said and shared, Adam. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's so evident in and in all of the experts. Wow, you are a master. You truly are a master at your craft. But it's so evident that when we as judges are critiquing this, I keep on hearing you say, find the instances of truth in the scene and recognize those instances. Specifically, you're looking at the entrances, the exits, the positioning, the reactions, or choosing not to react. You're constantly reminding us as judges, look for the honest, look for the truthful pieces, the specifics in the scene. And you've given us just a plethora of questions to remind us of. Wow, I want to get all those questions. I'm so anxious to get all these written down and get these. This is awesome. Let's take a couple of questions, yes, from our audience here, and I'll see if I can kind of summarize this one, Adam. So in terms of a judge, or perhaps, and this might just be, coaching philosophy, and some coaches might believe this, some coaches might believe this, but what's your take on the cheat open kind of mantra? Is that something that we should be looking for, or when should we be looking for that, cheat open, or don't pay attention to that? What's your take on that?
I think you have to pay attention to it a little bit, right? I mean, if we can't experience it, it's not, the art is not shared. It has to be given in some way. But I think the thing to also be aware of is, is it motivated by some reason, right? This probably falls, I think, maybe a little bit on the heads of coaches, but for actors too. Are they just looking out to declaim, or are they looking out because maybe they don't want to look at the person, so they're talking, but then they're checking in, but really it's kind of hard to look at them. Are they finding reasons to cheat out? I think that we have to cheat out purely from a technical standpoint, but there also there can be power in performing a scene 3/4. But you have to vocally compensate for that, right? And so I think that goes into some of the kind of vocal delivery and the physical delivery notes. If they are choosing to be facing upstage, are they vocally compensating for it? And if not, the balance is off.
Sure. Very helpful. Thank you. Another question. How do you suggest, Adam, giving feedback to the students regarding physical movement or blocking that has, most likely been the decision of the coach? So as a judge, you're judging the scene, and so many times, especially in ensemble acting, those students, they're just doing what their director told them to do. But you, as a judge, might go, how do you massage that instance as a judge?
I would encourage them to find a motivation for why they're moving over there. Are they moving over there and to find meaning in the blocking? And that, they've told you to cross stage left, and it might actually just be to kind of open up the stage. But I think encouraging them to find a reason for that cross. When you cross stage left on page 2, it didn't feel like it was a purpose. I think there may have been an opportunity because for that. So I think encouraging making finding meaning in the blocking would be helpful.
Sure, absolutely. And one final question here. Can you visit with us as a judge? How do you judge being in the moment and the honesty? Like, how as a judge can you tell? Yeah, that's like an honest moment. Like, what does that look like, feel like, sound like? What does that taste like to you
I
when
mean,
you know?
it goes back.
Oh
It
yeah,
goes back to Potter Stewart, right? You know it when you see it. But I think it's something that that feels a connected. It doesn't. I think that is the actor kind of playing at something, or does it seem like they're really listening, that they're really talking to somebody? Do the words sound like they're coming from a real place? Is it is it finding kind of different levels, or is it all on the same level? I mean, that to me is part of truth. But I think mostly paying attention, especially in ensemble acting, for is there connection when person A does something, is person B responding? I mean, on a very basic level, that's something that you can see happen. You can see them physically give energy and someone respond to it or not. And if they're not responding to the energy in the room in some physical or vocal way, that to me is a sign that they're not connected.
makes sense. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And again, wow, we have just had, wow, a whole semester of learning. You have packaged it so carefully and so articulately and have given us so much to think about. We are absolutely blessed to have you in our IHSSA family. And please know, friends, I will be sharing all of Adam's work with us afterward in our slides. Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
And now, friends, we are moving on to our final speaker joining us from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Please welcome me in joining Dr. Fariel Pearson. Fariel Pearson is a Kenyan, Indian, queer, disabled Muslim immigrant who is an associate professor at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And they have a multitude of national awards over the whole span of their career education for 24 years. Dr. Pearson has taught high school, English language, arts, and teacher education. And along with her students, she is the founder of, I love this, she is the founder of the Secret Kindness Agents Projects, which have been featured by Lady Gaga's Born This Way Foundation, Hallmark, Parents Magazine, Learning for Justice website, and the magazine Midwest Living Magazine, and many, many more. Her research interests include peace, justice, and kindness education, as well as the intersectionality in critical, trauma-informed, and culturally sustainable pedagogies. We are absolutely blessed to have Dr. Pearson here with us. Thank you. Thank you so much for saying yes to you. And yes, what an indeed pleasure it is to have you here in this space. Welcome, Dr. Pearson.
Thanks so much, Stacy, for inviting me in for that very flattering introduction. I'm really happy to be here. It's kind of hard to like follow those other two speakers, but I'll do my best. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully the slideshow works. Does that work? Are we seeing that?
Yes, you are golden.
Fantastic. So you can see my email there if you ever need to reach me. It's the best way to find me. I'm one of those people, if the little red notification goes up that I have an email, it bothers me. So I have to respond to it right away. So it goes away. So yeah, I am Dr. Fariel Pearson, or Fariel Pearson, however your face says it. Also known as Mama Beast. I'll explain that in a bit. And so I'm here to tell you the origin of the sorry, not the Facebook, of the Secret Kindness Agents, how you can do the project in your own life or be a Secret Kindness Agent in your own life. And then some advice for you as judges that came out of my research on kindness. So let's begin. With a little disclaimer that if any of you have seen the movie Up, you know it starts out real sad, but you stick with it and it gets better. It's kind of the same thing with the story of the Secret Kindness Agents. So I'm going to take you back to the year 2012, which I can't believe is 12 years ago now. Both of these photos were taken that year in 2012 in the summer. As you can tell, it's pretty warm. On the left is my child Iman, who turned 6 in April that year. And on the right is my friend Jennifer's daughter, Avi, who also turned 6 that year. They were both very similar. Avi lived on the East Coast. Iman lived in Nebraska at that time. And so they were both obviously lovers of the sand and water and giving hugs. And you can see Avi's arms outstretched because she loved to give people hugs, and so did Iman. They both loved to sing, kind of the soundtrack of their lives. They would just, I remember Iman coming downstairs and singing, "I'm coming down the stairs with Purple Bear," and just being just this joyful, loving person. They both were very excited about school that year. Because they love to make new friends, especially people who were different from them, even people who didn't speak the same language. They both loved teachers in particular. They thought teachers were the best people in the world. And so they were very excited about going to school that year in the fall. And so that semester went really well for both of them. They made lots of new friends. They loved their teachers. And on December 14th of 2012, Iman put on their little backpack and walked across the street to school. And Avi put on her little backpack and got on the bus. And that evening, Iman came home, and Avi never came home again because she was murdered in her classroom with 19 other children and 6 of their educators. Avi went to Sandy Hook Elementary School. And I was a friend of her mother's, and I knew about Avi, and I knew that this was the first time that I was afraid for my own children. So at that time, Iman was 6, my older child, Elahi, was 9. I was teaching at a high school. I'm no stranger to gun violence. I've lost students to gun violence. My family's been a victim to gun violence. But this was the first time that anybody had targeted small children. And so I was a mess. Iman came home from school, Elahi came home from school, and I was just a wreck on the couch. I gathered them both under a blanket and just held on tight and was just seriously contemplating never letting them go to school again, never going to work again, figuring out how to keep my students safe. And I just didn't think I could. And I was just paralyzed. And my children were confused. They'd never seen me in this state before. I'm usually a very bubbly, optimistic person. I've been through a lot of severe trauma, and I've always sort of come back from it at some point, but I wasn't coming back. And so, of course, the kids asked me what was wrong. And I had to tell my children what had happened to Avi and what had happened to her friends and what had happened to her teachers. And if you know small children, you know the first thing they ask is why. And so, of course, they asked me, "Why did the shooter do that, Mom?" And I said, "I don't know." And honestly, to this day, I still don't know. And I just have a knee-jerk reaction sometimes when students ask me a question that I don't know the answer to. I usually throw it back. "Well, why do you think?" Right? And so I did that. I asked my kids, "Why do you think he did that?" And my son, my older kiddo, like I said, he was 9. His name is Elahi, and he's given me permission to tell you that he's a nerd. He's got glasses. He has an inhaler. He loves science, like the whole deal, right? He said, "You know, Mom, people bully me all the time because I have a weird name, because I'm one of the only brown kids in my school, and because of my asthma, because I'm smart. And when they bully me, I get this icky feeling inside me, and I want to be mean back." And so maybe that's what happened with the shooter. Maybe people were mean to him all the time, And he got that icky feeling so bad that he wanted to be mean back. And I said, well, you know, that makes sense to me, but you've never been in trouble. You've never been mean back. Why is that? And he said, because at the last minute, someone's nice to me. You know, a friend asks me if I'm okay, or a teacher will notice and take me aside, and that icky feeling goes away a little bit. It was interesting that he never said it went away completely, just that it went away enough that he didn't feel the need to be mean back. And so Iman was listening to their brother and said, what if people had been had been kind to the shooter every day of his life from the minute he was born, every day after that? What if people had been kind to him? Maybe he wouldn't have done what he did. Now, that's a very simple, naive idea from a 6-year-old, and I will admit that I am obsessed with serial killers. I have watched every documentary, I listen to the podcast, I read all the books, I know all the signs. I usually ask people when I first meet them, you know, sneak in a question here about what's your relationship with small animals, and how do you feel about setting fires, and do you like your mom? Things like that. So I know that you can't just like smile and hold the door open for Ted Bundy and he'll stop killing serially. So I understand that. But at the same time, I was feeling this lack of control, this lack of power. How was I going to keep my students safe? How was I going to keep my children safe? I can't change what happened at Sandy Hook. I can't help what's happening necessarily across the city or even next door, but I can sort of control my own environment. And so I was looking for ideas on Pinterest because that's where I used to go when I was having the feelings. Now it's TikTok and Instagram, but I still go to Pinterest. And I saw this envelope, like a photo of an envelope, and it had top secret stamped on it. And it was talking about, you know, random acts of kindness. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, right? So I had this idea, and it was winter break, and I checked with my friends on Facebook because, you know, when you're teaching high schoolers, you got to come correct. You can't like just go wishy-washy with a half-baked idea. And I was like, okay, listen, I'm gonna have acts of kindness in this envelope, and if they want to, they can do one, and then I'll give them a prize, and y'all will support me. And my friends were like, yep, we'll give prizes too. Like you go, girl. And so I went back in January and I spoke to my students and I said, listen, what if I have this envelope, random acts of kindness, and if you want to, you can pick one out, you can go do it, and I'll give you a reward. And these were juniors in high school. And they looked at me for a second and then they said, well, we have to confer. Because I taught them to confer and, you know, question authority and all this stuff. So I was like, well, you best confer quick because, you know, Amazon delivers everything and your girl's not coming back unless we do something. And so they went to lunch, they talked about it, they came back, and they said, all right, so your idea has potential. It has potential. But we have a couple improvements that need to happen. So I was like, all right, give them quick. And the first thing they said blew my mind because the students that I had were in a program called the Avenue Scholars Foundation. And to qualify for that program, they had to be living in really severe poverty. So most of my students' families made less than $500 a month. Many of them owned nothing. They were going home to empty fridges. They didn't have daily access to hygiene products or laundry. Many of them were evicted all the time. And so the first thing they said was, it's not really kindness if you expect a reward. And so we don't want prizes. We're going to do this and we're going to do it anonymously because we don't want to be thanked. We're going to do acts of kindness because it's the right thing to do. And like I said, mind blown. And it taught me a huge lesson about what kindness really is, right? We all have that one grandma who's like, why didn't you send me the thank you note after I gave you your present? Like, did you do it for the thank you note, grandma, or just to give me the gift, right? And so, yeah, we want to do it, but we want to do it without any expectation of reward. I said, okay, I'm on board. I'm on board. What's the second thing? They said, well, we have to remind you of your motto, which is all of us or none of us. Turns out like children pay attention sometimes when you teach them stuff. I said, okay, so what does that mean? And they said, well, you can't be an if you want to thing. It has to be all of us or none of us, and that includes you. And so I have to tell you about where that motto came from. When I was in college to be a teacher about 27 years ago in Minnesota, which is where I went from Africa because a friend lied about the weather. So we had a guest speaker who was Mahatma Gandhi's grandson, Arun Gandhi. And he told a story that sort of affected everything that I do, my parenting, my teaching, my leadership. So the story was there was a little boy who had diabetes, pretty severe diabetes, and they couldn't stop him from hoarding candy and eating all the sugar. And it was very dangerous. And so they took him to Gandhi and they said, please, you have to help us. And he said, okay, let me speak with the boy. So he spoke with the boy. Boy came back and he said, okay, I won't eat so much sugar anymore. And the family asked, what did you say to him? And he said, well, I told him that this was so important that all of us adults, including me, were going to stop eating sugar so much. And so the lesson that taught me was that if we're going to expect people to do what we ask them to do, if they know that in a million years we would never do that, they're not going to take it seriously. And so from then onwards, in every class that I taught, it was all of us or none of us. If I asked my students to clean up the classroom, I cleaned up the classroom with them. If I asked them to write a poem, I wrote a poem too. If I asked them to give a speech, I also gave a speech, right? And so they took that seriously. They said, if we do this, it's all of us or none of us, miss. You got to do this too. So I said, that sounds good. We'll do it. And so we had to figure out how we were going to do this thing and how we were going to do it without being caught. Because some of the acts of kindness that we were talking about would be writing notes to people, and they were very fanatical about signing things. And so they said, we have to have secret agent names. So secret kindness agent names. So we had a naming day. Everybody got an agent name. The process was somewhat convoluted for others. Some people, it was very easy. And I felt kind of brave that day. And I said, okay, you can name me. You can give me my agent name. They're like, oh, we already got that. So my agent name is Mama Beast, because years before I had been teaching at a different school for 10 years. And if any of you know, maybe you've been called, if any of you who are female presenting have been called mom by a student by mistake, that happened to me a lot, which was upsetting because at the time I was like 23, 24 years old, and these children were like high schoolers. And now it's cool. But they would call me mom, and then some on purpose. And then after a while, you get a reputation. And I started hearing rumors that I was being called the beast. And I was like, that's terrible. The English is not my first language, but I teach it and I know that that's not a good thing. And they're like, no, miss, it means you're good at what you do. You're beastie, you're in beast mode. And I was like, I don't believe y'all. And they said, go look on Urban Dictionary online. This was my first time on Urban Dictionary. And let me just say, the trauma is real. You can't wash your eyeballs clean enough from what you see on the Urban Dictionary. But there I was, and it turns out it's true. So when I went to the new school where I was doing this, they called me Mama Beast. And so that's my agent name. And then we had to figure out what our acts of kindness were going to be. We had 2 rules. The first rule was they couldn't cost any money because none of us had any. But this has become a really big deal since the inception of this project, because it turns out that most adults think of acts of kindness as donations of money, of items. I paid for the coffee at the person in the line behind me in the drive-through, right? But kindness doesn't have to be monetary. You don't have to be rich or popular or famous or influential to do an act of kindness. You just need your own humanity. And so that's a big thing that we learned. So that was the first rule. They couldn't cost any money. The second rule was that we were feeling overwhelmed by the world at that time. So we decided we were going to limit our acts of kindness to the school grounds. So in the building or just outside the building. And then because I'm a cheesy teacher, I was in musical theater my whole life and drama and Model MUN and like all the things, debate, we had to have a ceremony. And so each act of kindness that we had brainstormed, we cut it down to 21 acts of kindness because there were 21 of us. Each one got an envelope. We didn't know what was in each one. It was on the teacher desk in the front. We all stood in the back of the room, and then I would play a song, right? Like about kindness or justice. Like, you've got a friend, stand by me. Then they were like, this is too old school. We need some Bruno Mars up in here. I'm like, bring me the song. I will preview it. Then I will play it. So we'd play the song, and all of us would very seriously go up the middle of the classroom. We would draw one of the envelopes, write down our mission, and then we would recite the oath that we had written based on the Green Lantern rhyme scheme, because Ernie and Jesus were obsessed with the Green Lantern. So we recited the oath, and then we recited the set of risks we were taking by doing the project. Things like, I will not get thanked. My face might hurt from smiling too much. People might think I'm a nice person. All of these things came true, by the way. One of the acts of kindness in the envelope was you had to smile at everybody you saw every day for a week, even if it was awkward and they didn't smile back and you didn't feel like it, you still had to do it. So all of them came true, but that was our ceremony. And then after the first or second week, we created a little journal, right? A little reflection where we all had to write down really briefly before the ceremony, what did I do last week for my act of kindness? How did it feel before? And how did I feel after I did my act of kindness? And so we went through our journals actually a few weeks later to see, were we seeing a pattern in our journals? And we did see a pattern, which was that we always felt better after we did our act of kindness, even if we were already having a spectacular day. And because of that, the students and I started to understand that we had some control over our own day, right? These were students who didn't have control over what they could wear, what they could eat, whether they could eat, how their day was going to go necessarily when it came to which classes they could take, where they could sit, where they could stand. They were told what to do and how to do it all day long. But this was something they could control. And so they became addicted. And they started doing extra acts of kindness. They started going out into the community and doing things, into their families. And then they started bringing in news stories and YouTube videos for me to show during our brain breaks in class. And then they're like, Miss, we're being super extra about this, and you're not being extra, and all of us are none of us. So get out there and bring us something. So I went to the magical place, the internet, and I found the story of the two wolves. And this completely changed everything for all of us. It's a really quick story. I found it on the First Nations website, and it goes like this. So there's a grandfather talking to his grandson, and he says, I have two wolves that are always fighting inside me, right? They're battling it out. There's one who's full of kindness and generosity and joy and compassion and love and warmth. And then there's a bad wolf who's full of anger and jealousy and spite and revenge and hatred and darkness and just coldness. And so they're just always fighting each other. And the grandson asks him, well, which wolf wins the battle? And the grandfather says, it's the one that I feed, right? It's the one that I feed. And so I told this story to my children at home, my 6 and 9-year-old. And then I told the story to my 17-year-olds at high school, and they understood it in the same way. Because when I asked them, what is the food for the good wolf? They said, well, it's when you're nice to somebody. I said, okay, Marco, when I'm nice to you, am I feeding your good wolf or my good wolf? And he said, both. Because you feel good about yourself. You did something nice for me, but I feel really good too because you were kind to me. And I said, okay, well, what's the food for the bad wolf? And we talked a lot about this. And we were like, well, when you bully somebody, when you gossip about somebody, when you leave someone out, when you make a horrible remark about them, when somebody says something mean to you, that's the food for the bad wolf. And again, it feeds both the bad wolves, because while it might feel powerful in the moment to be mean to somebody, eventually it's going to feel pretty rough, right? And my son, my 9-year-old, said, remember, Mama, when we were talking about the shooter, and I told you when people are mean to me, I get that icky feeling inside and I want to be mean back. That icky feeling is my bad wolf getting stronger. And then my little one was like, sometimes I wake up and both my wolves are sleeping. And I was like, yeah, kid, that's called apathy. Is that how you're feeling right now? And he goes, yep, that's how I feel. Both my wolves are sleeping. And I just woke up and I just felt meh. I said, what do you think you need to do? And Iman said, I think I need to wake the good wolf up by doing something kind. And then I heard a ruckus in the kitchen for the next hour. And then the child comes up to me with a plate full of my favorite cheesy scrambled eggs with my hot sauce on it. Here you go, Mama. And I cleaned the kitchen. And I said, oh my goodness, what's happening with the wolves? And Iman said, my good wolf is full of joy, and his eyes are shiny, and his coat is shiny too, and his muscles are strong, and his tail is wagging. And I was like, well, what about the bad wolf? And Iman goes, I think he's dead. Which, by the way, your bad wolf never dies, okay? You just have to be hangry. You just have to be upset. You just have to be scared. That bad wolf just comes right back up again. But it was really interesting to watch how this changed my students, because after we talked about the story of the two wolves, I asked them to raise their hand if they'd ever heard anybody say, oh, you really need to meet this person. That's a really good person, or those are good people. Everybody raised their hand. And I'm sure you have all heard somebody say that. That's a good person. Those are good people. And we've all heard the opposite, right? That's a bad person. Those are bad people. Stay away from those people over there, right? Bad people. And yet when I ask people, I've done this with audiences of thousands of people, right? And I'll ask the question, how many of you believe you are truly good? 100%. You've never done anything wrong to anybody. You've never wanted revenge. right? Nobody raises their hand. And then I asked the other question, how many of you are truly, truly evil? There's always like two people who have aspirations, right? To be the Joker or whatever. But there's nobody who's truly evil either. And yet we lie in society and we say these are good people and these are bad people. And children hear this early on. I've done this with 5 and 6-year-olds and they've heard it, right? And so when they mess up, it starts to make them wonder, does this mean I'm a bad person? Jesus used to come up to me after a string of bad decisions, right? Because he's hungry, because he's scared, because someone's been mean to him, because he's experienced racism for the 3rd time that week. And he will snap at somebody, and then he'll be mean to somebody, and then he'll come to me at the end of the day just dejected, and he would say, "What's the point, miss? I'm just a bad kid." But after the story of the 2 wolves, I remember him. There's one day he came to my classroom, he showing me his teeth. I was like, "Ooh, what's happening? Did you have dental work?" He's like, "No, I'm smiling at you. Sit down." I was like, "That's not smiling, but okay." Sat down. He's frantically cleaning my classroom. He's washing my board. He's cleaning up the trash. He's straightening papers. He's like, "What else do you need?" I'm like, I'm good. Like, what's happening?" He said, "Well, my bad wolf was real strong. And I thought, I best go feed the good wolf and wake it up, you know?" So it was a complete 180. The other thing I noticed, so they weren't giving up on themselves, but I noticed they weren't giving up on other people either, because, when you put students in small groups and you're walking around, you develop this invisibility cloak and they don't know you're there. And so they'll say things they would never say had they known you were right behind them. And so I used to hear that, "Oh my gosh, did you see so-and-so? I can't believe anybody's friends with her. She's just a horrible person. She's a ratchet. She's a thought." I'm like on Urban Dictionary trying to figure out what they're saying, But after the story of the 2 wolves, I would hear the same kids saying things like, "Oh my gosh, Maria's mean to people all the time. I wonder who's hurting her at home. We should sit with her at lunchtime, feed her good wolf, and see if we can stop that kind of behavior." So it became very, very different, right? And so they developed what I started to see as their signature moves, right? So these were extra acts of kindness that were not in their envelope. These were things that fit with their personality, things that they enjoyed doing. Some of them I had to like rein back in a little bit. We had Agent Scrappy Doo Lance, who was the youngest drag queen in Nebraska at the time at age 17 with his 6-inch platform. He saved up money, bought a lawnmower, and was mowing people's lawns at night in his 6-inch platform heels and his feather boa. He told me about it. And I was like, "Sweetie, Agent Scrappy Doo, listen to me, please. Okay, please, you could fall and be run over by your lawnmower. It's dark, it's an uneven ground. You're wearing 6-inch platform heels. You're already 6 feet tall. He said, "Can we compromise on a wedge? I won't wear a flat." And I was like, "We could do that. And your boa could get stuck in the engine, strangle you. Let's do the hot topic, you like fingerless gloves and keep your hands soft." He's like, "Oh, you're a genius." I was like, "I know, I've been to school a lot." And let's ask for consent because we're in Nebraska. People hear a loud noise, at 3 a.m. in their front yard, they coming out with a baseball bat and or a gun. Like, let's not, so we had to rein people in. Ernie came to me with a red face. He's like, "People keep slapping me." I'm like, "Friends don't slap friends, Ernie." He's like, "It's not friends, it's strangers." I said, "What are we doing to the strangers before they slap you?" He said, "I'm hugging them." I said, "Why are we hugging strangers?" He goes, "Well, they just look sad." So I sort of just launched myself at them and they slapped me. I said, "Consent is a thing. So you got to ask, are you sad? If they say no, how about a fist bump instead?" We practiced. He came back a week later. He's like, "This consent thing is genius. I haven't been slapped in a week." I said, "Tell all your friends, Ernie. Tell all your friends about the consent," right? So it was things like that. Ayeli became obsessed with picking up trash in the environment because that was her first assignment. At first, she was terrified that people would look at her because she was super shy. She cried the whole time. She came and got me and was like death grip on my arm. "Come with me." And she screamed and cried the whole time. And finally, I was like, "They're looking at you because you're screaming. So let's cry quietly." By the end of that week, she had 5 volunteers and was proudly, and then she continued that throughout the semester. She even yelled at a poor guy who was not related to the school who littered. "Do you think I came from Africa to clean up your country? Shame on you. Let's go community service." The guy started weeping. I was like, "Ayeli, you can't make grown men cry while you're doing an act of kindness, So they developed these signature moves, and they all had stories like that. And then pretty soon, here are the agents. This was a photo taken by the Ralston Recorder newspaper, which Ayeli, the little shy one, she's here in the gray hoodie in the front. There's Lance, the drag queen, in the blue shirt. Ayeli told the newspaper about us, Little Miss Shy Girl, okay? And of course, the photo was of the back of them. I was not here that day. I didn't know this was happening. It's the back of them because they wanted to remain anonymous. Some of them were absent that day. So there was a story in the newspaper. People started learning about us. And then I was bragging about my students on Facebook. My friend Cindy, she'd published a book I'd written with my students at the last school. She's like, do this as a book and we'll publish it at no cost to you. You can see Erin Gruwell, the founder of the Freedom Writers, wrote a little blurb there for us. And so I was like, Cindy, that's a terrible idea. It's a lot of work. I don't like it. And she's like, all of us or none of us, ask your agents. I was like, I hate you, Cindy. So I asked students, they made sure I would do most of the work. And then they said, yes. So we did. And on the last day of school, I was so proud of them. They said, we don't want to keep the money from this book. If anybody buys it, we want to donate it somewhere. So they all voted for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation because one of our agents had been diagnosed with diabetes 5 months before. And so that's where proceeds from the book go, and it's still in print, it's still doing well. And it's got little pieces by each of the agents in there. And the forward is by Avi's mom's best friend, actually. And then a friend of mine dared me to apply to do a TED Talk. And, that's a really easy dare. They'll never pick a teacher. They picked a teacher. So I had to do a TED Talk. I haven't seen it, so I can't recommend it. And as I was teaching the high school and then leaving the high school, they asked me to create social media so we could continue the project since they were addicted. And so we're on Facebook. The Instagram is run by an 11-year-old, so there's not much on there. But we are on Facebook. Twitter is also extinct, but Facebook is going strong. So because of all of that, the news stories, the social media, the TED Talk, the book, it's kind of gone viral. It is nationwide. It's also in, I believe, 11 different countries at the moment, in over 500 that I know of, schools, preschool through university, in schools, in teams, in clubs, in societies, and then we have rogue agents. I had one 13-year-old from La Jolla, California, message me, Agent Gemini, reporting for duty. Today I recruited my mother, Agent Aquarius, Agent Gemini out. I'm like, you don't have to tell me what you're doing. Thank you. And so it's kind of spread. And as Stacy mentioned, we've been recognized by a few different places. So you can look those up. I studied the impact of the project for my dissertation, 23 different educators from these different places, preschool through university, public, private, suburban, urban, homeschool, and then the one in Boston is at the Boston Children's Museum, and then 2 different provinces in Canada. And I found that the effects were the same as what happened to me and my students with all 23 of these people, which was that it led to a kindness focus. It changed our way of teaching, the way that we did our classroom management, our climate, the students' social emotional skills. There was a 3rd grader in rural Colorado who had selective mutism who began talking, and she told her teacher it was because of the project. Parents were calling teachers, who's this kid that you sent home to me? Last year they were bullying their sibling. This year they've given their sibling some secret kindness agent name and they're baking cookies for the neighbors and it's real weird. Fewer referrals, all of that kind of stuff. The impact on the adults, just a greater focus on kindness, treating people differently, more aware of our choices, greater empathy, better relationships with students and colleagues, improved morale, and improved well-being. The science is strong behind the physical and psychological impact of kindness. Same kind of thing with students, right? As well as ownership and initiative of the space, because most of my students couldn't afford to be in extracurricular activities, so they didn't feel like they belonged in the school until this project. Context again, people actually felt like they were looking forward to going to work for once. That was a hilarious and very unexpected thing. Sense of community and safe spaces. So if you want to be a secret kindness agent, you can do it however you want, right? Tweak it to fit your own context. I don't know your context. I don't know your students. But everyone gets an agent name, right? It's really important. You all decide together what your missions are. If you're going to do this with one other person, with a bunch of other people, your acts of kindness have to become a regular habit. That's what makes this project different from all other kindness curriculum. We would do it once a week. My family does it every day. And there has to be reflection after each mission. For my students, it was the journal. For my family, we have a conversation at the dinner table. I have kids all over the world doing TikToks or art projects or collages or just having dialogue. making art. So where are we now? New book, 2020 for educators. There's a podcast with about 5 episodes, and then our producer had a baby, so that had to stop. We have a newsletter and a Patreon. It's been turned into a play that's being shown at the Rose Theater in Omaha, Nebraska in January for middle schoolers. And here is my advice to you as judges. So a reminder to feed your good wolf, right? And to give yourself kindness and grace, because kindness also includes kindness to yourself, kindness to self, kindness to others, and kindness to the environment. Think about your nonverbal kindness cues to the people that you are judging, your body language, right? Of course, your smiling, your nods, your encouraging facial expressions, your disposition, be open to new ideas, to new materials. When you're giving your feedback, write constructive comments that are helpful and not cutting, right? You can do that. Give authentic and detailed comments. This was something that we practiced as secret kindness agents. Like instead of saying, oh, you're just a great person, you would say things like, oh my goodness, that blue shirt really compliments your eyes. That's, I really love how easily you make friends and how welcome you make people feel. So really authentic and detailed comments, not those pithy, empty platitudes. Assume best intent, right? Look for the good in everyone. Live in nuance and stay away from binary thinking of people are either good or people are bad. We're all capable of both. I think Adam brought that up too. Stay away from stereotypes. We heard that earlier as well. And remember that you owe this to yourself just as much as you owe this to those around you. The secret kindness agents, I hear time and time again from the educators who are involved in this project that I did not expect this to be personally important to me and personally positive. I just thought I was doing it for work, but it turned out to affect me personally as well. So if you have any questions, let me know. And also there is my email again. I feel like I rushed a lot. Stacy, am I doing okay?
You are right on, Dr. Pearson. You
All
are
right.
absolutely right on. Immediately, as I know some friends are have some questions in the Q&A. I am struck in so many different ways. First and foremost, thank you for sharing your very personal story with your own child with us, and that and how this whole kindness project came to be, and just the magic of one little seed, and where this thought came from, and how that thought of from a child of well, what about this, and the impact that their voice had. I think that resonates with our own students in our association. The impact that our students have on the future is just, it's so bountiful. So the impact that you share with us. I also am absolutely reflecting on, yes, as an association, we aspire to be a kind and caring association for our students and for our judges. Absolutely, that is an expectations. We have to be kindness agents. I heard you say, and we all know that children are listening. Children listen, and the remark that a judge says to them, and that one-on-one, or even that remark on a piece of paper, that stays with them forever, and has the potential to either uplift them or not. So yes, as judges, we have to have our kindness agents faces on, and you demonstrate it. That's as simple as smiling, as smiling to our student when they come into the room. It starts with something we all have control. We absolutely all have control of that, and you remind us too the impact of what our association, how that can affect a student later on in their life. A question in our Q&A, is there ever, do you perceive, from, and this is your teacher hat, is there ever conflict between being the teacher, the judge, and kindness when it comes to giving criticism or giving improvement? How do you negotiate? Well, I'm a teacher. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I reflect back to something my grandmother used to say, which is I have to be unkind to be kind, right? Like I'm going to point out something that you don't want to hear right now, but it's going to save you embarrassment. It's going to save you in the future, right? Like you're not going to let your friend go out there with their skirt tucked into their underwear. Like they're not going to like hearing that, girl, your skirt is stuck in your underwear, right? And so we point things out in a respectful way, not in a cutting way, but just, hey, you might want to know that this is what's happening and here's why we need to fix it, right? Giving that respectful, honest feedback. And here's how we do it better next time. As a teacher, I was kind of known for never kicking kids out of class, right? Unless there was an extreme danger to others, I never kicked them out of class. I never kicked them out of my room. I would say your room assignment says room 360. It doesn't say hallway, because I would never kick my own child out of my house because they messed up. I would take them aside. I would say, I love you. I love you. And I don't like you very much right now because you done messed up. So let's figure out how to not do that again. Right. And so I see that as not being unkind. I see it as being kind, as being firm in my kindness, as having that loving kindness that I care about you enough to want you to be better. Right. As opposed to somebody who's just going to be like, whatever, I'm just going to, I've written you off and it's done. Right. So that's sort of how I think about that with my teacher hat.
And I love that comment. I care about you enough to give you this specific feedback. And that is absolutely what we aspire in our association. We as judges, I care about you enough to give you the very specific, detailed, justify is what we always say in our association. I want to share this with you too, Dr. Pearson. This comment just came in, and you would love to hear this. Your presentation gives us proof that there is great wisdom to be gained from our children, our students. That's one of the things I love about speech contest. I come home from a day of judging and I feel great hope for the future. And I think as a judge, that's great judges do that. They recognize the hope in the piece.
That's one of the pieces that, when I say that everybody has to decide what your acts of kindness are going to be together. And part of that is because youth are way more creative than adults. They will come up with so many better ideas than we ever will. And it goes down to, like, I had teachers teaching first grade who were telling me the ideas that came from their 6-year-olds that I never would have thought of. And I'm like, that's genius. That's absolutely genius. So yeah, and this project was not created by me. It was created by them. It was just me having that fatal flaw of not being able to say no to teenagers, right? Like, tell me what to do, we'll do it. But that's exactly it. It comes from them and it's about them.
And wow, what a great place to end on. It's about our students, friends. It's about the students that come to our speech contest and keeping our intent always focused on our students. Thank you, Dr. Pearson. Thank you so much. I will be sure to get your information out to our IHSSA family. You can see Vince that just came on there, and that is applauding there, Sean. And I can hear it. I can hear everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Pearson. Thank you. All right, friends. Now, as we move on here, I want to give you some special reminders. First and foremost, grab my sheet here. There we are. First and foremost, thank you to our judge certification team for your leadership in putting together our panel for today. 3 amazing speakers, and all the connections are there in all different avenues. Thank you, judge certification team. If at this moment you are a judge or coach, we also made this opportunity for coaches. If you are using this as your judge recertification, that would mean you're an experienced coach, or you are an intermediate coach or judge, or you are simply a coach. If you want to use this as your recertification in the Q&A right now, if you can please type your name. So if Vince was going to use this as certification in the Q&A, that's downstage center, he would type in Vince Haraski, judge test, or I need the test, or send me the test. What's most important is that we have his name, Vince Haraski, send me judging test. So that is number one. If you are doing this for judge recertification, and that means you're an experienced judge or an intermediate judge, or you're a coach and you want to use this to get certified so you don't have to come to the in-person, in the Q&A, you are going to type your name. I see 24 people right now. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Lots of people coming in. That's great. Keep them coming. Put that in the Q&A, and then I will be sure to send you the test. So that is number one. All right, and then I also will be sending out a post assessment for everyone to fill out regarding this whole webinar. We are always looking for ways to improve this experience. And two, we're always looking for topics as well as expert speakers in their field. So please, everybody, you'll be receiving follow-up communication from me. And we rely on your feedback and your lens, specifically as judges, to see how we can enhance this whole experience. If you are planning to take this for recertification, there will be a follow-up email that gives you the tests. It'll tell you where to log on. It will also go into details about bound, and you have the option to pay the $10 bound online if you like to use this, or instead you can always send in the paper copy as well. So again, you've typed in the chat your name, Sean Starr's test, or Sean Starr, judge's test. You've typed in your name. I can see, wow, this is awesome. 79 friends are going to be taking the test online, and then I'll be sending everyone follow-up communication. We need your feedback. We need your lens to improve and enhance this experience. And then, of course, I'll also send everybody instructions on how to register on Bound, as well as where to find that Constitution. You're going to need the Constitution to complete the exam. Thank you so much, friends. You are excused. Oh, early is on time. So yes, it is 12:35. And you friends are excused. I, of course, will stay on here, and judge certification team, please stay on here. But yes, you are excused. You are excused. And again, if you were taking this for judge certification, you wanted to make sure you had your name in the chat, and we'll make sure we get you the information. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So much in my mind right now of everything that was shared. Gosh, wow, just incredible, incredible insight. And as I was listening, just thinking about, yeah, how can we make our organization better equipped for our students, specifically in judging. And these three speakers just gave us a plethora. Again, you are excused from the webinar. You can go ahead and you can end. And there is, if you're looking for that end, that bell, the bell that just went off, That is on the lower right-hand part of your screen. It's a little red button, and it says end. I see we still have some friends on here. And yes, lots of people that are going to be taking the test. You can see that. And yes, we are still recording. Mhm. Mhm. So if you have any other questions, we're going to go ahead and we are going to end this. If you have any specific questions, feel free to email me. I see some people, it looks like a couple people, and Sean, you might be able to help me. They've raised their hand, but I don't see their question in the Q&A.
I also do not see it in the Q&A.
Yeah. So I'm going to stop recording, and Judge Cert Team, you can stay on here.